and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the end of his talk. So please welcome Micah Riegner.
Okay. Hello, is my audio on?
It is.
Yes.
And I'm going to see if I can make you the host now so that you can share your screen. I'm going to stop my share. There you go.
Oh, share screen. Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
I'm going to make you host and see if you
Okay.
can then share your screen, Micah.
Okay. Let's see. Are you seeing
There
that
you
now?
go.
Okay. Do slideshow mode. Okay, well, thank you, Lori, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. I know it's late for some of you. I have some friends in Manaus, and it's already 10:30 there, so I'll get going. So yeah, I'll be talking about the primates of the Amazon. And as you can see, the Amazon is pretty well decorated with some dazzling avifauna, and that's a Guianan cock of the rock up in the left and golden parakeets down here. But for this presentation, we'll switch gears a little bit and focus on primates. Over the years of going to Brazil, I've been getting pretty fascinated by them. So we'll start off with talking about habitats in the Amazon, the different floristic communities down there, and how those relate to primates. Talk a little bit about taxonomy, anatomy, and ecology of these primates. And then the primate diversity in sort of these three regions where I have some field experience. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about conservation. So I like to start off showing this map, and this is a World Wildlife Fund map. And you can see the yellow line delineates the Amazon biome. So that's the biogeographic region of Amazonia. And then the blue line delineates the watershed. So basically, all the water that falls within this line flows into the Amazon River. And you can see that the Guianas, these rivers actually don't flow into the Amazon, but biogeographically, they're part of the Amazon. A lot of the same plants and animals are up there. And so zooming in a little more, here's a depiction of the different rivers in the Amazon. And you can see the rivers that flow out of the Andes, which would be here on the left. Those are whitewater rivers. So they're full of sediments draining the Andes, which are very young geologically. And so all these rivers are whitewater rivers. And then blackwater rivers drain the Guianan Shield. And so the bedrock here is super old. It's been weathered, and so there's not many suspended sediments. And the plants here, basically the chemicals in the plants leach out into the rivers, turning them black. And so that's why they're blackwater. And then clearwater rivers are pretty similar to blackwater rivers. They drain really old rock, and they also don't have many suspended sediments. And the Tapajos is a classic clearwater river. It's kind of a turquoise color. And so every year, these rivers, after the rainy season, they flood huge areas of the Amazon. I think it's 12% of the Amazon gets flooded every year. And so the whitewater rivers flood forests that are called várzea. And so you can see here, this is an area near the town of Tefe. I took this photo from a plane. And then rivers that, the blackwater rivers flood forest that's called Igapo. And these are, that's a photo from near Manaus. That's Anavilhanas National Park. It's one of the biggest island archipelagos in the Amazon. And so these two river types, or or forest types are pretty different. Varzias tend to be richer as far as species, and I think there are 1,000 different trees known from Varzias, whereas Igapo, those forests only have about 600 species of trees, and it's pretty difficult to live for trees to live in the Igapo because of the low nutrients and also being flooded every year. And of course, there are different bird communities in both forest types. And the final forest type is terra firmi, and so this is the other 88% of the Amazon, so most of the Amazon, which doesn't flood. And this is the most diverse habitat, the tallest trees. I think I read some papers there were some studies where they found like 500 different species of trees in just a couple hectares of forest, which is pretty mind-blowing. I look out my window and I just see, well, now it's dark, but when it's in the daytime, I just see like 4 or 5 different species of trees out here up in Prescott, Arizona. But so yeah, terra firmi. And of course, you can't have a presentation about the Amazon without showing a toucan. It's a white channel-billed toucan from a tower north of Manaus. And so most of the primates are in terra firmi, although there's an interesting sort of interchange between the primates in the terra firmi and the flooded forest. Every year after the flood, during the flood, a lot of the flooded forest trees put out fruit. And so that attracts a lot of primates. So that's actually the best time of year to see primates from the rivers. And then during the dry season, they disperse back into the terra firmi forest. And then within terra firmi, there are a bunch of other different forest types, such as campinas. And these are basically stunted forests that grow in super nutrient poor soils, like these white sand soils. And they're so nutrient poor that trees can't even grow on them. And it's a very specialized plant community. And also there's some cool birds that you can only find in these habitats. And then as you move away from a campina into the taller forest, there's this transition zone called Campina Rana. And that's really dense forest. It's very difficult to walk through that if you're not on a trail. And then as you get west into the Andes, there's this whole transition zone from the lowlands up into the cloud forest of the Andes. That's the most biodiverse region on the planet. But so we'll focus here on primates, and this is a phylogenetic tree. And you can see, so we're going to focus on the New World primates, which are called the Platyrrhines, and the Old World primates are called the Catarrhines. And the main difference between those two groups has to do with the structure of the nose. Platyrrhines have these really flat noses, and then their nostrils come in at an angle, whereas the Catarrhines, their nostrils go sort of straight in. And there are other differences between these two groups, in the dentition and whatnot. But you can see here that they split about 40 million years ago. And so during the Oligocene, it's still not really known how that happened, but one of the thoughts is that primates from Africa somehow made it across to South America and colonized South America. It could have been, the continents could have been closer at that time, and maybe there was a chain of islands that permitted dispersal. So, or maybe they were on a raft, although it's hard to imagine that happening. But anyways, 40 million years ago, this primate arrived in South America, and that led to the diversity of primates we see today. And this was actually before South America was even connected to North America through the Panama land bridge. This all happened, well, there were primates in South America. And then once the continents were connected, primates dispersed northward all the way up into Mexico, along with a whole bunch of other organisms, armadillos, sloths. But so we're going to focus on these groups, the marmosets and tamarins, which are in the family Callitrichidae, capuchins and squirrel monkeys, which are in the family Cebidae, night monkeys in the family Aotidae, Uakaris, Sakis, and actually Titi monkeys are also in the family Pithecidae. And then howlers, spider monkeys, and woolly monkeys, those are the largest of the Amazonian primates. They're in the family Atelidae. And just a little bit of a historical context. So Alfred Russel Wallace was one of the early Victorian explorers of the Amazon, and he spent a lot of time there collecting specimens. And he was one of the first people that sort of make note of this this fact that there are different species on different sides of the rivers. And here's a depiction of the Titi monkeys, and in this graph shows the different rivers. So you can see that the rivers play an important role in separating different species. At one point, these were all considered one species, but recently they've all been split. But you can see that the rivers play a big role in that. That's not to say that they're the only, they're not the only reason for such diversity in the Amazon. There's sort of this growing body of evidence that large flooded areas would have separated populations and sort of shaped the Amazon we see today as far as species and where they occur. But you can see here, there are numerous different color patterns of these Titi monkeys. This one here on the left is a pretty weird one. It does cross rivers. And but so jumping into the callitrichids, the marmosets and tamarins, also Geldes monkey is in this group. It's a weird thing out in the Western Amazon. It really likes bamboo, and I'd love to see one day. But there are 42 species currently recognized, and they're insectivores. They also feed heavily on gum or sap, especially the marmosets, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And they also eat a lot of fruit. Each group is led by a dominant female, and she actually suppresses the breeding in the other females. So there's only really one female that breeds per group. And then it's the males that take care of the young. So if you ever see a marmoset or a tamarin with a baby, chances are it's the male with the baby on its back. And almost all of them give birth to twins, except dwarf marmoset. And that's just a weird one. I have some photos of that one coming up. But you can see the skulls here of the marmosets and the tamarins side by side. And one of the things about marmosets is they have these specialized incisor teeth, and they use those to actually gouge out holes in trees, sort of like a sapsucker, and they'll come back and eat the gum or the sap that exudes from those holes. And that's a big part of their diet. Tamarins, on the other hand, don't have that, and that's not that's not part of their behavior. And I actually happen to have a skull, or a replica of a marmoset skull. One of the benefits of having a dad who teaches biology is you get to borrow his pygmy marmoset skull for presentations. But you can see how tiny it is, and those specialized teeth for gouging out the bark. And here's another map showing some distributions. So you can see, well, this species here is the pygmy marmoset, and it's west of the Rio Madeira right here. And the Rio Madeira is a very important river in separating a lot of populations. And then east of the Madeira, you get all the other Amazonian marmosets. And you can see these other little tributaries sort of splitting them up. And then up in the northern Amazon, you get tamarins, this bare-faced clade of tamarins. And then also in the western Amazon, so west of the Madeira, there are actually two main types of tamarins out there. There's the mustache type tamarins, and then the saddleback tamarins, and you can see they actually overlap almost perfectly. And what's interesting is these two different types actually form the same mixed species troop. So you can actually see, you often see both types in the same troop. And they probably do that for a lot of the reasons that birds form mixed species flocks, for avoiding predators and having sentinels. But so yeah, these two groups overlap in pretty much throughout their range. And so the next family is Cebidae. These are the squirrel monkeys and capuchins. There are 29 species currently recognized, although taxonomy is always in flux, as we know from the birding world. And these are omnivores, so they feed pretty much on anything. They eat a lot of fruit. They'll eat insects, eggs, bird eggs, lizards, granola bars, chocolate bars, pretty much whatever they can get their hands on. And they have a hardly seasonal when they breed, and like the tamarins, they also form these mixed species troops. So you can often see squirrel monkeys and capuchins in the same groups. And you can see the skulls there for comparison, pretty similar structurally, although capuchins have these larger canine teeth. And there's a common squirrel monkey. So these are found throughout a huge area of the Amazon. And then the two main types of capuchins are brown capuchin here on the left, and then white-fronted capuchin. And brown capuchins are larger. They've got bigger teeth than the white-fronted capuchin. And I think recently there have been some taxonomic changes. They've actually put these two into different genera. And clearly this one's okay with it. I don't know about how this one feels, or this one, but so there's been some taxonomic changes with those two groups. And now we're getting into the night monkeys. The family is Atelidae, and there are 11 species. These are the only nocturnal New World primates, and they look a lot like some of these nocturnal lemurs out in Madagascar. And they're frugivorous, so they eat mostly fruit. Monogamous, so there's typically a breeding pair, and then young from that pair will hang out in the same area. They like seasonally flooded forest, and they're often near settlements. So I have my friends in Manaus, they run Amazonia Expeditions. It's a boat company. They've got this little hotel in Novo Airão. It's a little town about 3 hours from Manaus. And these night monkeys are right behind the hotel. And you can see them almost every evening they come out. And yeah, and then they roost in these tree cavities during the day. And they have a kind of interesting sound. They sound a lot like an owl. They've got a really deep, resonant sound. Something like that. And there's their skull. You can see those amazing eye sockets. And then, yeah, you can see, again, the major rivers are separating out the different species. So this is the main channel of the Amazon, also known as the Solimões, and then the Rio Negro up here. Those two rivers come together just south of Manaus. And so now we'll get into the family Pithecidae. These are the Titi monkeys and the Sakis and the Uakaris. There are 4 genera and 44 species, so they're pretty diverse. So I'll get into the Titis first. These are some of my favorite primates in the Amazon. They're highly territorial, and they have these very small home ranges. They're super vocal almost every morning. If you can hear these, and they call for about 15, 20 minutes just at dawn, typically. And they're basically making sure there are no intruders in their territories. And so family groups are made up of 2 breeding adults and then juveniles. They're monogamous, and also the male takes care of the infants. And I actually have a recording of one here. Let's see if it'll play. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording there. Otherwise, my neighbors might wonder what's going on. But so yeah, you can hear that. That's a pretty characteristic sound of the morning in the Amazon. And here's their skull, and they're generalists. They don't really specialize on anything in particular. They feed mostly, well, they feed on a lot of bamboo shoots and insects, some fruit. So they eat pretty much whatever. And they like really dense forests, like secondary growth and bamboo forest. And they're often pretty difficult to see. And again, another map showing the different distributions of these species. And you can see, yeah, how the rivers again play an important role in separating them out. And now we'll get into the Sakis and the Uakaris. These again are another of my favorite groups. They're very tough to observe. They're super fast. They're shy, and I've actually tried to keep up. I've had to run along trails to keep up with them. And they have these very large home ranges to capitalize on patchy resources. And what they feed on fruit, but also they have these specialized canines to crack open nuts. So they eat a lot of rough, big nuts and palm nuts. So they have these really big teeth to be able to crack them open. And they can form really large groups up to 65 individuals. I've seen a group of Sakis in northern Brazil. I think it was just around 65 individuals, pretty amazing. And again, yeah, specialized teeth for cracking open seeds and nuts. And so they're seed predators. So they're actually not doing the trees a favor. But here's a skull of a Saki, and you can see that they've got these really large canines. And Uakaris are, I guess, sort of the floodplain forest equivalent of the Sakis. But they do wander into terra firma as well. There are two species, the white Uakari, which is this one, and then multiple subspecies within that. Or I guess it's called the bald Uakari, and then the black Uakari. And I think some authorities have split them in further. But you can see the white Uakari or the bald Uakari is found in the Western Amazon, and they really like Várzea, so the whitewater flooded forests. And there's a trip we do with field guides to Mamirawa, this blue zone, and that's where we see this white Uakari. I've got some photos of it. It's a pretty wild looking thing. And then, yeah, the black Uakaris are found up in the northern Amazon, and they really are specialists more of the blackwater flooded forest, the Igapo. And so Atelidae is the final group we'll talk about. These are the howlers, spider monkeys, woolly monkeys, and muriquis. Muriquis are found in the Atlantic forest, and they're critically endangered along with a lot of other things of the Atlantic forest. And so there are 25 species currently recognized. And like I said, the largest of the New World primates. These are the only ones who have prehensile tails. So all other neotropical primates, actually none of the Old World primates have prehensile tails either. And they're the most threatened due to hunting. So starting with howlers, these are lethargic, and they feed mostly on leaves. So they spend a lot of their day just sitting around and digesting. They're sort of the equivalent, they're like the cows of the monkey world. And the males have this hyoid apparatus, which produces that roaring sound. I actually don't have a recording of one available right now, but you probably know what they sound like. They're super loud, and they've got this big throat sac that sort of amplifies the sound. They have these big teeth for shearing leaves, and they show extreme sexual dimorphism. So males and females are very different. Males tend to be a lot larger than the females, and there also can be some differences in their coloration. So typically in a group, there's a dominant male, and then juvenile males will disperse to new groups and try to supplant the dominant male of that group. And you can see the skull here and those large teeth, which they use to basically shear leaves off stems. And so spider monkeys and woolly monkeys are frugivores. Not sure where my photo went. And they're important seed dispersers because they travel huge distances to find food, and then once they eat a seed, they'll travel many miles and then defecate it and disperse the seed of that tree. They have enormous home ranges, and they move in a style called brachiation. So they basically hang under the branch and then sort of swing from branch to branch with their arms, and they're super acrobatic with their. I've seen them just dangling from their tails. Woolly monkeys are in this group. They're the most threatened of the Amazonian primates because they're the largest and also the most hunted. They show moderate sexual dimorphism, and they form large groups, but that sort of break up and fuse. And here's a skull of a spider monkey. I happen to have another skull here, and this is life size. These are bone clones, so they're plastic replicas, but you can see how big it is. And those teeth, actually pretty similar to human teeth. So you can see another map here of the different species and how the big rivers separate them out. This is again the Rio Madeira and the Tapajos. And then woolly monkeys, which are found mostly in the west here. And there's even one that gets up into the foothills of the Andes. That's the yellow-tailed woolly monkey. And that's up in northern Peru. I'd love to see that one day. It's a beautiful animal. So switching gears here a little bit, I'm going to talk about some of the trips I've been doing over the past several years. I guess, yeah, starting in college, I would go down for my summer breaks down to Cristalino Lodge and do some guiding there, and then started doing some trips with Amazonia Expeditions. They run these boat tours. And so I did several trips with Fiona Reed, and she's a mammologist. She did the Peterson Field Guide to Mammals and a bunch of other cool books for mammals of Central America and South America. And also did a couple of trips with Walt Anderson. And then recently, after joining Field Guides, I've been doing a bunch of these riverboat trips with Field Guides, a lot of the trips with Brett Whitney and other guides, Tom Johnson, who I saw his name on the list there. Hi, Tom. But we started the series of tours called the Great Rivers of the Amazon tours. And basically we get on a boat in Manaus and then spend about 2 weeks just living on the boat and waking up in a new place each day, canoeing through the flooded forest, and then hiking trails that are super remote. And they're really great tours. And you can see we don't go hungry on those tours. But so I'm going to talk about this trip we do to the Madeira Tapajos interfluvium. So the region between the Rio Madeira and the Tapajos here in this yellow square. And within that region, there are a couple smaller tributaries, the Canuma, Abacaxis, Maués, and also the Aripuanã. Here's another version of that. So we fly to Manaus and then go down the Amazon up the Madeira. And there's this funny little channel that connects the Madeira all the way to the that connects the Madeira to the Amazon. It's called the Paraná Uraria. And during the flood season, you can get a big boat in, and that allows access to these other small tributaries, which are still being explored. This is the Canuma, this is the Abacaxis, and then the Maués up here. And so these are very remote areas, and we've been doing trips for the past, I think, 5 or so years. And each of these tributaries separates one of the a marmoset species, which I'll show here in the next slide. And there's some cool birds in this area too. Harlequin antbird, pale-faced bear-eye, golden parakeets you can see around Maués. Bald and vulturine parrots are also in this area. So it's a pretty fascinating place. And then the Aripuanã is another area we've done some trips. It's a tributary farther south, and there's some cool primates in this area as well. But so here are the marmosets, which we've seen actually we've seen all of these on one tour. So starting with golden white marmoset, this is just found between the Madeira and the Canuma River. And you can see it's all white and has this orange tail. And then the next marmoset over is the Satiri marmoset. It's actually named after the indigenous group there, the Satere Mawe. And that's the group you've probably seen on documentaries where for this initiation ceremony, they make a glove and they fill it with bullet ants, which is like the most painful sting in the Amazon, maybe in the world. And so they fill this glove with bullet ants, and in order to become a man, the young men have to put this glove on and show no sign of pain. So we don't do that on tours, but that's the area this marmoset's from. And then the next marmoset is Maués marmoset. So crossing the Abacaxis River, you get this one. And the Abacaxis is not a huge river, but you can see how they're strikingly different. Maués marmoset has these really fluffy ears, kind of looks like a koala. And then Satiri marmoset has these bear ears. It kind of looks evil. Then the next marmoset over is the tassel-eared marmoset. That's on the other side of the Maués. Another, again, not a huge river, but large enough to keep these species separated. Here's a video of the Satiri marmoset. This is the Satiri marmoset. So that's probably one of the only videos of that species. It's just such a hard thing to get to. And so actually when we first started doing some of these trips, we thought, oh, we need to go to the most pristine forest to find these marmosets. But it turns out that these marmosets really like disturbed habitats and secondary forest. And they're actually right around these villages and communities. So they do pretty well around these communities. And then Micah Riegner marmoset, this is one that's found off the Aripuanã. And this is another cool marmoset, the dwarf marmoset. Again, also found on the Aripuanã. It's got this super tiny distribution, and it's only found in flooded forest. And actually just made a video about this for our field guides Outbirding project. And if you can see it, it's available online. But yeah, this is one of the smallest primates in the Amazon. It was actually only discovered in the late 90s. And yeah, only found in this tiny little sliver of the Amazon. And here are some of the Titi monkeys we've seen on that trip. Prince Bernard's, ashy gray, and then Baptista. And you can see sort of the different color patterns they have. So this one has a gray throat. This one here has a sort of a rich orange throat. And then with a bit of luck, we've seen red-nosed bearded Sakis. And this is a species that's found west of the Madeira River. And you can see they've got this bright red nose. The original name was white-nosed bearded Saki, but that's because it was named by someone who just saw the specimen, and the specimen, obviously, the nose coloration, I guess the blood drained from the nose and it was white. And so recently it's been changed to red-nosed bearded Saki, which is more accurate. And these form large groups and they wander huge areas again through the Amazon. Here's a little baby on the right. And if you're really lucky, you might see woolly monkeys. I saw this several years ago with my buddy Albert on the Aripuanã. And these are, you have to go to some pretty remote areas to see them, away from any communities or people, because they get overhunted pretty readily. And I actually have a video I took of that one. So that's what woolly monkeys sound like. And then also spider monkeys, you have to be pretty lucky to see them, but we've seen a few, again, in remote areas. And it's the black spider monkey that's in that southern part of the Amazon. So now we're going to jump north into the northern Amazon, Roraima, and Suriname. So Roraima is the northernmost state in Brazil. It borders the Guyanas in Venezuela. And we just started doing some trips up there the past couple of years. And I did a Suriname tour a few years ago, or yeah, I guess a couple of years ago with Dave Stayskull. I have some photos from that. So the Rio Branco is the main river in this part of the world. And it's kind of an unusual river. It's a whitewater river. It's, I think, the only whitewater river that doesn't drain from the Andes. It drains from the Guyanan highlands, and it flows into the Rio Negro, which then heads south and meets up with the Solimões around Manaus. But this is an interesting part of the Amazon. There are a lot of these campinas, all the brown here. These are all white sand forests in this part of the Amazon. And there's some pretty neat birds as well. But pied tamarin, this is an animal found just around Manaus. In fact, it's critically endangered. It's always had a small distribution, but it's getting smaller and smaller as Manaus keeps getting bigger and bigger. But I think it's just within the 35 kilometers north of Manaus where you can see this animal. And then north of its range is golden-handed tamarin. And it's not that they're actually out competing pied tamarin and sort of moving south into the distribution of pied tamarin. But pied tamarin is, you can see it in a lot of these little parks in Manaus. We used to take groups to the Hotel Tropical, but that hotel went bankrupt a couple of years ago. But there's this patch of forest right around the hotel where these primates often hang out, and you have a pretty good chance of seeing them by walking around there in the morning or afternoon. And there are a bunch of projects working with pied tamarin, trying to maintain the genetic diversity, because a lot of these little islands in Manaus, they're basically isolated from one another, and so they're people trying to maintain corridors and also make sure they have moving them around to make sure there's enough genetic diversity in them. So there's golden-handed tamarin again, and its Latin name is Seguinus mitis, which refers to the golden hand. So after King Midas and the golden touch, so you can see their hands are this golden coloration, and their feet as well. And these have a huge distribution throughout northern Amazonia into the Guyanas. I actually took this photo in Suriname. And brown-bearded saki is a species we sometimes see up in Roraima. There's a park there called Virua National Park. And I was there a few years ago and saw a huge troop of them. You can see the male here. They've got this really cool beard. And here's their vocalization. So kind of a funny sound for a big monkey. They sound like tiny little birds. And here's another species of saki in the northern Amazon, white-faced saki. And this is a male with this big white face. The females don't have that, and they're quite a bit smaller. And then there are a couple different spider monkeys up there. White-bellied spider monkey is found on one side of the Rio Branco, and then black, or I think it's called red-faced spider monkeys on the other side. They're all black with a red face. And I took that photo in a reserve called Maracá. It's a big island up there in northern Brazil. A great place to see wildlife. And now we'll get into the Western Amazon. So this is an area we just started doing trips a few years ago. I did the first trip with Brett Whitney, and we stayed at Mamirawa Reserve, which is a big area of flooded forest, and then Reserva Amaná, and that's just north of that. I'll show another map here. And then Flona Tefe, it's another reserve around the city of Tefe. But here's the lodge where we stayed at. It's basically a floating lodge. This is the main dining area, and then the cabins, and everything floats up and down with the flood cycle. So it's pretty cool. And a lot of they run on solar as well. So here is another map of that area. So we flew into Tefe. That's the main city in that part of the Amazon. Then took a boat up to that lodge. It's called Posada Uakari, and it's right in the middle of Mamirawa. So this is Mamirawa. It's this triangle between the Solimões River, and this is the Japura that comes down from Colombia. And I think it might be the largest flooded area of flooded forest in the Amazon. There's another big area in Peru called Pacaya Samiria, but this is certainly the biggest area in Brazil. And it's a good place. Well, it's the only place to see this white uakari and also this Benzolini squirrel monkey. And you can see it's got this really dark cap, and it's only found there. And what's interesting, it's actually found along with the other common squirrel monkey there. You can see them both in the same area. I don't think there are many places in the Amazon where you can see two squirrel monkeys in the same place. And this is the main reason to visit Mamirawa, white uakari. Just a super strange looking animal. Males and females look pretty much the same. They've got this red face and then long white fur. You can see its arm is actually pretty thin, but that's mostly fur that makes them look bigger. And so last time we had pretty good luck with these. We took us a couple days to finally find them, but we spent 20 or so minutes just following this group around. And you can see too, they've got these stumpy tails, and they wag them around sort of like kind of like a dog. And then crossing into the next reserve, which is called Amaná, which is that's all black water. We get into the area for black uakaris, and pretty similar structurally to the white uakaris, but they don't have the bald face. And like I said before, they're only in they really like the flooded forest, and they're pretty difficult to see. It took me a while to try to get this photo. And here's the group from afar. They were grooming one another. But so that's up in the Blackwater flooded forest. And then up in the terra firma is this thing called mottle face tamarin. And there are not many places in Brazil to actually see this species. I think in Colombia you can see it, but Amana is one of the best places. And you can see they've got this sort of a white face and almost hairless face as well. Monk Saki is also there, and these are found well into Ecuador and Colombia. And then there's this really nice looking Titi monkey, a white collared Titi. And actually, friends sent this to me. We didn't see them last time, but apparently there's this little field station there where this Titi will come out and eat fruits and come right out into the open. And Spix's night monkeys, the species of night monkey there. So we saw this in the flooded forest. You can see the baby has these darker eyes than the adults. And then crossing down into the Tefe area. So this is south of the Amazon. This is Avila Pires saddleback tamarin. And these form groups. There's another one. These form groups with the red-capped mustache tamarin, and so you can often see them in the same area. You can see this one's they're structurally a little different. They just have bigger heads, I think, and also larger feet, larger claws. That's another photo of the same species, but you can see the striking white markings on the face. I think in some parts of the Amazon, they call it macaco bilhete, which means the ticket monkey, because it looks like they've got a ticket on their face. And then there's this Buffy Saki, which is around Tefe. Well, I put it in quotation marks because it's the taxonomy is still being worked out. It could be a different species, but it's this beautiful Saki monkey with his golden fur and then this dark stripe down the back and tail. And then this is probably one of the hardest primates to see, the pygmy marmoset. I've only seen one, and that was a couple of years ago. I did a trip with Junior, Moasir Junior, the boat captain, and we drove down on one of these highways south of Manaus, and we were driving along and happened to notice this thing up in the tree, so we stopped. I thought it was an iguana at first, and then we got out, and it turned out to be a pygmy marmoset right next to the highway, and it was just pretty mind-blowing. It was just hanging out on this tree, and you can actually see some of these gouge marks it made. And again, these are super hard to see. They don't move as much as the other marmosets. They're pretty elusive. They stay huddled up next to the tree, and I was pretty happy to see that one. But they're found again throughout the Western Amazon, and they generally like flooded forest, although they can be up in the upland forest as well. But I think a lot of the trees that they feed on are in the flooded forest. So I put together a quick slide here of the predators for these primates. Down here is harpy eagle, and that's the largest raptor in South America. And then up here is crested eagle. It's actually a dark morph, and pretty rare to see a dark morph. That was near Manaus in Anavilhanas National Park. And so these birds regularly prey on primates as well as sloths and iguanas and a lot of other things. But here's black hawk eagle down here on the right. Again, will probably feed on smaller primates like marmosets and tamarins. And then a boa constrictors will probably catch a tamarin if they could. This was from our Suriname trip, and that boa is working on a tinamou. And then also margays are known to eat primates. I've actually read a paper that someone observed a margay doing an imitation of a tamarin vocalization to sort of bring the tamarins in order to eat them. So it's basically doing playback on tamarins, which is pretty cool. And these ones we saw on our trip in Mamirawa. We went out one night. It was after dinner. It was a nice clear evening. We thought we'd just do a quick night trip on the canoes, and we saw some eye shine, and we're looking at it. We thought it was an opossum at first, and then we got closer and then realized it was this margay. It was just one individual. It was just this one here. So we're watching it. We were super thrilled to see a margay. And then suddenly this other one showed up. It was on the ground and so it ran up this tree. And then they started interacting. Like this one came right up to it and they started snarling at each other. And we thought they were going to start fighting, but they didn't. So, but it was a pretty amazing observation to see that. Maybe my guess is that maybe this was a female, this was a male, and he was checking her out potentially, but something that's not seen too often. And we'll talk a little bit here about conservation and the threats to primates. Obviously, habitat loss is a major issue for a lot of species, and especially fragmentation as well. Here's an aerial image of Manaus. You can see some of these islands of forest that have remained in different reserves, and so hunting is also an issue, especially for the larger primates. I mentioned the woolly monkeys and spider monkeys. Also the pet trade. I saw on the news several years ago, I think they were in Lima airport. They got caught with all these marmosets in their jacket. Like they somehow stuffed all these live marmosets in a jacket and thought they could get through customs, security. But so the pet trade is still an issue. People keeping these animals as pets, and then climate change. And that's also linked with habitat loss, because with deforestation, basically the forest in the Amazon produces the moisture, which produces the rain. And so by removing the forest, the Amazon's getting drier. The dry season is extending every year, and basically, it's linked with the habitat loss there. And Brazil right now is going through a pretty rough time for conservation in general. The Bolsonaro, the administration, they've got this agenda to turn the Amazon into a they see it as this frontier of agriculture and mining. So it's and there's been a lot of cuts for national parks and research, but there's still several big reserves, and this map shows in yellow the indigenous reserves, and those cover a huge portion of the Amazon. And then I think the dark green is our national parks, and then the checkered area are sustainable development reserves. And so those are interesting models. It's basically a reserve where people can live, and local people can live and collect certain products from the forest, like Brazil nuts. They can fish, and basically the forest stays intact. The people stay in the forest, and also they can allow tourism as well. So it's a model that's been around for the past couple decades. And Mamirawa, that reserve I mentioned before, that's a sustainable development reserve. And I was very impressed seeing how it worked. All our guides were local guides from that area, and they do fishing, but it's well monitored and regulated to maintain fish populations in there. And so, I think a total of around 44% of the Amazon is is under some sort of protection, be it sustainable development reserves, national parks, or indigenous reserves. And indigenous reserves are very difficult to get into. You need all sorts of permits. I've actually never been in an indigenous reserve, but you can see they cover a very large portion of the Amazon. So just wanted to show you a couple reference books, which I've got here. And the first one is Handbook of Mammals of the World. So another benefit of having a dad as a biologist is you get to borrow some of his cool books and then drive him crazy by not returning them to where they belong. But here's a Handbook of Mammals of the World, and this is the primate volume, and it goes into every species. It's got distribution maps, illustrations, and some really good information. And then Conservation International puts out these marmoset, these folding guides, and they're essentially just illustrations with range maps. But here's the one on marmosets and tamarins, and so you can see them all on one page. And I think you can find these on Amazon. I've got one here for the Atlantic forest. But so these are nice references. And then I've got this other primate book, Primates of the World. And this is more of a sort of a general book, but it's got some really nice illustrations in it, a few range maps as well. And then Primates of Colombia is another nice book. I've never been to Colombia, but I'd love to one day. There's many cool primates there. And this book goes into some nice information. There's good information and also illustrations. They have these line drawings to show different behaviors, also the skulls. So it's a very thorough book. And also Mammals of Northern South America. That's a big encyclopedia type book that was actually illustrated by Fiona Reed. And I actually don't have one with me. So right now, just don't tell Fiona, but that's a great reference as well. And then this paper here by Van Roosmalen, I took a lot of those range maps from that paper talking about primate species. And photo credits, I'd like to thank all these people for the photos I used in this. And that's a baby dwarf marmoset, and probably one of the most adorable things I've ever seen. It was about this big. And so yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll be happy to answer questions. Here's my email address too, if you have come up with other questions or you're interested in seeing the Amazon. I know of a really great tour company called Field Guides you can go with, but yeah, any questions? I'll play this video actually while we're doing questions. These are the black Uakaris. You can see them wagging their tails. You can hear them in the background as well. Those little bird-like chips.
Micah, this is Mark. Micah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
This is Mark, and I'm just curious whether the field guide trips that you're leading and are a part of are primarily primate trips or bird trips or a combination of both.
They're mostly bird trips, but well, especially these Amazon trips, we also try to see the primates. It's sort of hard not to, but they're primarily birding trips.
Did you want to say something else, Mark?
No.
Margaret wanted to know if you know how many of the species that we talked about tonight are endangered.
I think just the pied tamarin is, I think, one of the most endangered in the Amazon. Fortunately, a lot of these Amazonian species are still they still have pretty big populations compared to the Atlantic forest. The Atlantic forest of Brazil, that there are a lot of endangered species there. A lot of that habitat's been converted, but I think for the most part, a lot of these Amazonian species aren't endangered per se.
She also wanted to know about the twins. Are they identical or fraternal?
No, I have to look that up.
I would think it'd be fraternal.
I'm sure Google will have the answer.
And I think you already covered this. Someone wanted to know about any possibility that African lost castaways brought some monkeys to South America. You talked about the rafts.
This was well before. This was well before people were, and yeah, this was, the Oligocene. The idea is that maybe the ancestor of these New World primates got onto some sort of a tree or something that rafted them across from Africa to South America, or maybe, I guess they could have island hopped if there was a chain of islands between the two continents. And it's possible too that sea level fluctuations could have allowed for things to disperse back and forth, but this was well before people.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking a castaway was the monkey, but maybe it was people.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Fiona, so this is a comment. The New World primates are not closely related to Old World primates, Old World monkeys, which you mentioned. So they would not have arrived recently. So that's answering another question. And then another question, marmosets in English are very different from what are called marmotas in Spanish. Any reason for this?
Oh, marmotas.
Marmotas.
Marmots, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I don't really know the etymology, marmoset, but
yeah. I don't either.
I don't know if there's a relationship or not, but
like the marmotas are little marmoset. I don't know. Unbelievable diversity. Excellent presentation. Bravo. I think those are all the questions we have. So
okay, so thanks, Lori. And if you have any more questions, there's my email. And I'm actually got to leave now to going to the COFAs to do some thrasher surveys. But I'll be checking email every once in a while.
Well, thank you, Micah. That was excellent. I really enjoyed it. Amazing, amazing animals.
All right, thanks.
Do you have anything, Mark? I don't have any.
Only that I wanted to wish everyone a happy spring, because although the calendar doesn't say it's spring, it is spring here in the Sonoran Desert. Many birds are nesting now, and we're starting to see some wildflowers. Even though we had a paucity of rain this winter, I have a backyard that's just about full now of blooming firecracker penstemons. So the hummingbirds should be happy with that. So get out there and see what else you can find that is new for spring.